So, as you can see, this park in Peckham has been here for a few years now, actually. When it was first built, they spent millions of pounds on it. It was in the newspaper, everybody was excited. I remember being in secondary school at the time, excited to come and play in this park. But now it's run down. It's probably one of the few places in Peckham you can actually see palm trees in Peckham. But it's not been maintained, it's not been upkept, it's not been taken care of. And a lot of the times what you find is that when you're actually doing your degree, especially with architecture, it's quite a long process. So you're going to find that actually you're going to be spending years of your time, your youth, studying, spending a ton of money, always thinking that you're broke, and getting to a point where you're just frustrated. You feel like there's no progress, you spent a lot of money, but it is valuable. There is value to what you've learned. And never forget that, and always remember that actually when you finish, there's going to be so much value to you that people will pay you for your knowledge, whether it's designing a renovation for them or an extension for them. People will pay you for your knowledge. Your CAD skills is valuable. Your 3D rendering skills are valuable. But if you fail to keep yourself up to date on the latest software or the latest trends or reading on what's happening in the architectural world itself, you will lose the value. So just remember to keep on top of things. I know it's really tough, but you have to keep on top of it so that you don't lose the time and the years and the money that you've spent. One thing to note is that when you finish your degree, the grades don't really matter. I know everybody's battling with each other to get the highest grade, to get a first, to get a second or a third. But one thing I've experienced is that your employer doesn't care about the grade, they just care that you've completed the course, and that shows that you're able to stick it through something quite complex, be able to actually produce high quality designs that go through steps from meeting the brief, going through multiple iterations, refining your design, and then presenting it in a way that the rest of your team or people around you can understand. One thing that I always get asked is it worth studying in London or outside of London? To be honest, the only real difference is the type of courses that you get. So what you'll find is that if you're studying outside of, say, a city like London, in a village or somewhere that's not really attached to a city, you tend to find most of your projects are based in terms of designing buildings within an empty landscape. Whereas when you're in London, you tend to find most of the projects they give you are going to be in an urban environment, really densely packed. So you have to deal with a lot of transport issues, gardening issues, landscape issues, privacy issues. So both are challenging in its own right. But to be honest, you end up learning the same thing. Thanks for watching. Comment, like, subscribe below. So one thing I would say is that you're never going to feel that you have enough time to actually complete your architecture coursework. Most times you get about 3 to 8 weeks, but in the end, your tutor will always change their mind even on the last week. So you need to get used to actually sticking to your ideas, maybe with your second or third iteration, even if the form is not what you like, or even if your function of the building is not fully formed. Because what you tend to find actually that I've learned from architecture school, it's all about aesthetics. It's all subjective. You might find that a student that hasn't really refined their idea might have really nice renders, really nice 3D model, really nice drawings, and they get a better grade than you. So it's really about trying to get to a really quick and happy idea that you're satisfied with, and then really refining your actual CAD skills, your rendering skills, your actual 3D model making skills. I know it's a bit contradictory. They want you to learn how to do architecture, but actually they just kind of want a pretty layout on the wall. But that's just one thing I've learned. So I guarantee one thing you're going to be thinking of as an architecture student, even before you get your laptop, is whether it's going to be a MacBook, whether it's going to be a Windows computer. And obviously that affects the software that you get. So in terms of CAD work, AutoCAD is usually what everybody starts off on. And that is both on Mac and Windows, but it seems like there's a lot more features available on the Windows version. You also have to remember Photoshop and Adobe and Illustrator, all of those things are both on both platforms. But when you want to use, say, software like Rivet and other applications that are specific for, say, Windows, what you tend to find is that the Mac users have to either use mirroring software or split their computer into two, so they have kind of the Windows and the Mac OS on one half. It's expensive. It's not as powerful when you get Macs because you can't afford the really high specs when you're a student. So my honest opinion is go for the Windows PC. It's cheaper, you get more specs, and it's easier to upgrade, really. So one thing I would recommend is that during your summers, definitely get work experience. It not only looks good on your CV when you're applying for jobs after your degree, but it gives you a reality check, because in all honesty, when you're in studio, you're the judge, jury, and God in the whole situation. You create the idea, you give the brief, you design everything. But in reality, actually, there's a lot of technicians, specialists, architects that basically have to listen to the client at the end of the day. So when you work in a studio environment, you realize that a lot of people come together and everything surrounds the actual client. So one thing I would definitely say is that avoid loan sharks, borrowing money. I know the banks offer loads of overdrafts when you're a student. Avoid it if you can. Get a job in your first year. Definitely, if you can ask money from your parents, ask your parents for money before even considering taking out any overdrafts or any loans or any credit cards. It just puts you in a really bad position. Architecture is really expensive, so it's not just a short period of time that you will be borrowing that money for. You would repeatedly keep taking that money out if you fall into that cycle. So one thing I would advise is avoid them. One thing that I did enjoy about studying architecture, no matter what studio you're in, there is a focus on making models. So using your hands, being creative, and you don't have to be the best at making models. It could be down to just making large blocks that represent your idea. But you need to get used to actually just being able to represent your ideas physically in a physical form. Because one thing that I realized that transcends all barriers in terms of people's understanding is people being able to physically see something, and it will allow people to pick your model up, look at it, understand what your views are, what you're trying to achieve on the site, or what your building looks like, really. So one key fact to note is that when you're actually deciding to study architecture at university, you actually have two paths that you can go down. So the first path is more artistic based. So that's if you choose like graphics design or some sort of art-based course at college. And then the second path is more science and maths based. So that's if you've chosen like psychology or biology or even maths or something like that potentially. Different universities cater to different people. So if you're applying to say Bath or Cambridge or Oxford, they more lean to you having kind of maths based courses. If you're leaning towards other universities, so I applied for Kent University and eventually Kingston University, they lean more to art-based courses. And that's just because they cater to different types of students that are studying architecture. Architecture is quite broad, so it's quite flexible. So just remember that, and just remember that it's not the end of the world if you've picked something that's completely different from someone else that that's applying for architecture. You can still get into university. One thing to also be aware of is that you actually need a lot of equipment. But what they don't tell you is that most of it you won't technically use in your first year. So most universities actually in your first year studying architecture, they want you to get used to drawing. So you're going to do everything by hand, everything's going to be pencil based, you're going to have to draw everything on an A0 drawing board. So probably the only really good and useful investment I made actually in my first year was actually getting my A1 or A0 drawing board. My laptop helped, yeah, but trust me, they don't make you do any CAD work in your first year. So don't rush during the summers before universities trying to get the best laptop, spending money before you even get your student loan. It's not worth it. You know, relax, get into the course first, see what your course actually requires, what your tutors require of you, and then make your big purchases, because you end up spending money that you don't necessarily need to spend. So typically, you will be presenting in front of your peers. So in one studio, you might have at least maybe 20 other students in, and sometimes in 30 or more. And usually each studio will have 2 tutors, and those tutors will assess your work, set out the coursework, sometimes will present, sometimes will bring in guest speakers. But the main way that they kind of assess your work and give you grades is through you presenting in front of your peers. So you would potentially do a drawing of a building, you put it up on the wall, everybody in your class will be sitting around your work, looking at you, and your tutors will then start to criticize your work. Constructive criticism, but sometimes it can be quite unusual, quite hard, quite nerve-wracking. But the quicker you can get to feeling comfortable presenting and talking in front of people, honestly, it's a skill that will stay with you for the rest of your life. So get comfortable with it and get used to it. So I am going to be producing more content like this. It is the first video in a series of vlogs that I'm going to be doing about my journey to becoming an architect and what I experienced during the workforce and during university. So stay tuned, subscribe, like and comment.